The words cut through Coldwater Junction's frozen air like a blade. Every eye in the town square turned to watch Maribel Bell, the Eastern woman who dared refuse protection, respect, decency itself. They expected her to crumble, to apologize, to disappear. She did none of those things. What happened next wasn't just one woman's fight for survival on the frontier. It was war, against prejudice, against winter, against a town that believed a woman alone deserved nothing but shame. Stay until the end. Hit that like button. Drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The stagecoach rattled into Coldwater Junction 3 days before Christmas, 1891, and Maribel Bell knew immediately she'd made a terrible mistake. Not about leaving Philadelphia. That decision had been easy after the factory fire. After watching her savings dissolve into medical bills for her father's ruined lungs, after realizing the city offered her nothing but the same grim future in different buildings. The West had seemed like possibility, like something other than slow suffocation. But this town, this godforsaken collection of wood and prejudice squatting in the Wyoming snow. She climbed down from the coach, her traveling coat already inadequate against the wind that knifed through the street. The driver tossed her trunk down with less care than he'd shown the mail sacks. Mara caught it before it hit the frozen mud, her arms protesting. Everything she owned was in that trunk. Everything that mattered, anyway. Bar W Ranch? She asked. The driver pointed north without looking at her. 4 miles. They ain't expecting you till tomorrow. I'm here today. He shrugged and climbed back up. The stage pulled away, leaving her standing in front of what passed for Coldwater Junction's commercial district. A general store, a saloon, a building that claimed to be a hotel, all of them leaning slightly, as if the wind had been pushing at them for so long they'd given up fighting back. 3 men stood outside the saloon watching her, not with curiosity, with assessment. She'd seen that look before, in factory foremen's eyes when they calculated how much work they could extract before a person broke. Mara picked up her trunk and walked toward the hotel. You lost, miss? The voice came from behind her. She turned. One of the men had followed, his boots crunching in the snow. He was maybe 40, weathered in the way men got out here, with a mustache that had probably looked rakish 20 years ago and now just looked tired. No, Mara said, not lost. You sure? Because women don't just show up here, not alone. I have a job. Ranch cook at the Bar W. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smirk. Worse. Pity. That's so. Well, I'm Thomas Brennan. I run the general store. You'll be needing supplies, I expect. Tomorrow, Mara said, after I've settled. Settled. He said it like the word was foreign. Miss, I don't know what you heard about the Bar W, but I heard they pay fair wages for honest work. That's all I need to know. Right. Brennan glanced back at his friends, some silent message passing between them. Thing is, Walt Brenner, he owns the Bar W. He's a bachelor, living out there alone except for his hands. And you being, well, a woman alone. People are going to talk. Then they'll have something to do besides freeze. The pity in his eyes deepened. That was almost worse than contempt. I'm just saying, there's ways to do things proper, so folks don't get the wrong idea. Mara shifted the trunk's weight. Her arms were starting to shake. Mr. Brennan, I've traveled 1,500 miles to take this position. I signed a contract. If Mr. Brenner has concerns about propriety, he can raise them himself. Walt don't have concerns. I do. We all do. Brennan gestured vaguely at the town. This is a decent place. We got standards. Then I'm sure they'll appreciate good cooking. She turned and walked into the hotel before he could respond. The lobby was dim, heated by a stove that was losing its fight against the cold. A woman behind the desk looked up, 50-something, with the kind of rigid posture that suggested she'd once been beautiful and was now defending the memory of it. Help you? I need a room. One night. The woman's eyes traveled over Mara's traveling coat, her worn gloves, the trunk she was barely managing to hold. $2 in advance. It was robbery. Mara had seen the rates posted outside, but she was tired, cold, and didn't have the energy for another fight. She set the trunk down, dug into her purse, and counted out the coins. You got a name? The woman asked. Maribel Bell. And what brings you to Coldwater Junction, Miss Bell? Work. What kind of work? Mara met her eyes. The kind I was hired to do. The woman's mouth thinned, but she pushed a key across the desk. Upstairs, third door. Breakfast is 6 to 8. You miss it. You miss it. The room was exactly what Mara expected. Narrow bed, single window, water pitcher with a skin of ice on top. She set her trunk down and sat on the bed, which creaked like it was personally offended by her weight. Her hands were shaking, not from cold, from the sudden, overwhelming understanding that she'd walked into something worse than she'd imagined. Brennan's concern hadn't been kindness. It had been warning. The woman at the desk hadn't been unfriendly. She'd been protective of the town, of its standards, of whatever fragile social order they'd built in this frozen nowhere. And Mara was the threat. She unpacked her contract and read it again by the fading light. The terms were clear. 6 months as ranch cook for the Bar W. Room and board plus $40 a month, more than she'd made at the cannery, more than she dreamed of making anywhere. Walter Brenner's signature was bold and decisive at the bottom, dated 3 weeks ago. Nothing in the contract said anything about marriage, about propriety, about needing permission from the town to do her job. She folded the paper and put it away. Then she lay back on the bed, still wearing her coat, and stared at the ceiling until the light died completely. Morning came with church bells. Mara woke disoriented, the sound cutting through dreams of the factory, of smoke and screaming. It took her a moment to remember where she was. Wyoming, Coldwater Junction. The job that was supposed to be her fresh start. She dressed quickly, the room was brutally cold, and went downstairs. The dining room held 4 other guests, all men, all eating in silence. The hotel woman, Mara still didn't know her name, gestured to an empty table without speaking. Breakfast was coffee that tasted like regret, and biscuits that had the texture of ambition but none of the follow-through. Mara ate mechanically, aware of the glances from the other tables. Not hostile, just measuring. She finished, paid, and stepped outside into cold so sharp it felt like violence. The church bells had stopped, but she could see people moving toward a white building at the end of the street. Sunday service. Of course, she should probably go, make a good impression, show the town she was respectable, all that strategic nonsense. But she didn't want to sit in a church surrounded by people who'd already decided who she was. She wanted to see the ranch, her employer, the place she'd be spending the next 6 months. Mara walked north through snow that was older than the town, packed and refrozen into something that crunched and held. 4 miles. She could walk 4 miles. By the second mile, she was reconsidering. The trunk wasn't heavy. She'd packed light, knowing she'd be carrying everything herself. But 4 miles in Wyoming winter was different than 4 blocks in Philadelphia. The cold found every gap in her coat, every weak seam. Her breath came in white clouds that froze on her scarf. But she kept walking. The land out here was different than anything she'd known. Flat, in a way that felt aggressive, like it was daring the sky to do something interesting. Mountains in the distance, sharp and white. Nothing soft anywhere. Nothing forgiving. She understood suddenly why people out here were the way they were. The land didn't care about you. It would kill you with the same indifference it showed everything else. You either got hard or you got dead. The Bar W appeared like a promise-breaking collection of buildings that looked functional rather than welcoming. Main house, barn, bunkhouse, what was probably a cookhouse. Corrals empty except for a few horses standing with their backs to the wind. Mara walked up to the main house and knocked. Nothing. She knocked again, harder. The door opened. The man standing there was maybe 35, tall in the way that came from actual work rather than just genetics. He had dark hair, eyes that might have been kind under different circumstances, and the expression of someone who just realized he'd made a significant error in judgment. "Miss Bell," he said. "Mr. Brenner." They stood there, cold air pouring into the house around them. "You're early," he said finally. "The stage came yesterday. I didn't see the point in waiting." "Right." He stepped back. "Come in. You must be frozen." The house was warmer, but not warm. Functional, like everything else. Main room with a fireplace, table, chairs that had seen better decades. Everything clean but worn. A bachelor's house, exactly like Brennan had said. "Coffee?" Walter asked. "Please." He poured from a pot on the stove. The coffee was better than the hotel's, which wasn't saying much. Mara wrapped her hands around the cup and waited. "I want to be clear," Walter said, not sitting. When I placed that advertisement, I wasn't expecting, that is, you thought you'd get a man or an older woman, someone different. I can cook, Mara said. Everything in my letter of reference is true. I worked in a commercial kitchen for 6 years. I can handle volume. I know how to manage supplies. I can do this job. I believe you. He ran a hand through his hair. But Miss Bell, Mara. Can I call you Mara? Everyone does. Mara, I need you to understand the situation here. I'm not married. Neither are most of my hands. You'll be the only woman on this ranch living in proximity to men who, well, men who aren't used to female company. I'll have my own quarters. The cookhouse, yes, but it's still, people will talk. They already are. Tom Brennan came by yesterday evening. He's concerned about impropriety. Tom Brennan should mind his own business. This is his business, the whole town's business. That's how it works out here. Everyone knows everything, and everyone has opinions. Mara set down her coffee cup. Mr. Brenner, I signed a contract. I traveled 1,500 miles. I spent almost everything I had getting here. I didn't come all this way to be sent back because people might talk. I'm not sending you back. I'm trying to explain. Then explain what you want me to do. He looked at her for a long moment. In his eyes, she saw the same calculation she'd seen in Brennan's. Different source, same mathematics. What would cause less trouble? Keeping her or sending her away? There's a solution, he said slowly. One that would satisfy everyone. What solution? Marriage. The word hit like cold water. Mara actually laughed, a short, sharp sound. Excuse me? Not to me, Walter said quickly. That's not what I'm suggesting. But there's a man in town. Good man, widower, owns a freight business. Jacob Mercer. He's been looking for a wife, and I think, no. Mara, just listen. No. She stood. I came here to cook, to work, to earn my own wages, not to be handed off to some stranger because it makes people comfortable. It's not about comfort. It's about survival. Yours and mine. If you stay here unmarried, the talk will destroy both of us. But if you were married, properly settled, then working as ranch cook would be perfectly acceptable. Respectable, even. Respectable, Mara heard her voice shaking. I'm supposed to marry a stranger, give up my wages, my independence, everything, so I can be respectable enough to do the job you already hired me to do? That's how it works out here. Then it's broken. Walter's expression hardened. You think I like this? You think I want to tell a qualified cook she can't work for me because of some social nonsense? I don't. But I have to live here. I have to do business with these people. And if they decide I'm running an immoral operation, they'll make sure I don't do business at all. So you'd rather sacrifice me. I'd rather find a solution that lets you stay, lets you work. Jacob's a decent man. He'd treat you well. And you'd have security, a home, protection. I don't want protection. The words came out louder than she intended. I want to be left alone to do my job, that's all. Why is that so impossible? Because you're a woman, and I'm sorry, but that's reality. They stared at each other across the table. Outside, wind rattled the windows. I'll introduce you to Jacob, Walter said quietly. Just meet him. See if... When? This afternoon. He'll come by after church. And if I refuse? Walter's silence was answer enough. Jacob Mercer arrived at 2 o'clock, driving a wagon through snow that was starting to fall again. Mara watched from the window as he climbed down, brushed off his coat, and walked to the door with the careful steps of someone trying not to slip. He was older than Walter, maybe 45. Solid build, graying hair, face that had seen weather and work. Not unkind, not cruel. Just a stranger who thought he had the right to evaluate her for marriage because some other men had decided it was necessary. Walter let him in, made introductions, offered coffee that Jacob accepted. They sat around the table like this was a normal social call. Miss Bell, Jacob said, Walt's told me about your situation. My situation, Mara repeated. Your employment here, the complications. The complications being that I'm a woman who wants to work. Jacob nodded slowly. I understand your frustration, truly. But surely you knew, coming west, that there would be certain expectations, certain proprieties. I expected to cook. And you can. As my wife, there'd be no impediment to you working here, or anywhere else you chose. I run a freight business. I'm not home most weeks. You'd have considerable freedom. Freedom! The word felt wrong in her mouth. As long as I'm married to you. As long as you're protected by marriage, yes. Mara looked at Walter, who was staring into his coffee like it might offer answers, then back at Jacob, who sat there with patient expectation, like her agreement was inevitable. What do you get out of this? She asked. Jacob blinked. I'm sorry? You're offering to marry a complete stranger to solve someone else's problem. What do you get? A wife, a home that's cared for, companionship, eventually. I'm not a young man anymore, Miss Bell. I'd like someone to share my remaining years with. But you don't know me. I know you're educated, hardworking, brave enough to come west alone. Those are qualities worth having in a partner. And if I'm difficult, sharp-tempered, what if I snore or have terrible habits or hate being touched? A flash of something crossed Jacob's face. Surprise, maybe, that she was speaking so frankly. Then we'd work through it. Marriage is compromise. Marriage is ownership, Mara said. Everything I have becomes yours. My wages, my choices, my body. You could beat me, lock me in a room, work me to death, and the law would call it your right. I would never, but you could. That's the point. The moment I say yes, I stop being a person and become property. The silence that followed was arctic. Jacob set down his coffee cup with careful precision. I see I've misjudged this situation. Walt, perhaps you should have made clear that Miss Bell isn't interested in a reasonable solution. Reasonable, Mara said quietly, would be letting me do my job. Your job is the problem. No, your judgment is the problem. Jacob stood. I'll be going. Miss Bell, I'm sorry you've had such a hard journey for nothing. Perhaps back east they're more tolerant of women who refuse good sense. He left without another word. The door closed behind him with the finality of a verdict. Walter stayed seated, still staring at his coffee. That was a mistake, he said finally. No, it was the only honest thing that's happened since I got here. Jacob would have been good to you. Jacob would have owned me. And now you've made an enemy. He's influential in town. He'll talk. And not kindly. Mara laughed, a sound with edges. As opposed to the kind things they were already saying, Walter looked up at her. You don't understand how this works. Out here, reputation is everything. You just destroyed yours, and probably mine along with it. Then I'll leave. Where? The question was sharp. You spent your savings getting here. Winter's coming on hard. The next stage isn't until Thursday, and that's if the weather holds. Where exactly do you think you'll go? She hadn't thought that far. Hadn't let herself. I'll find something, she said. There's nothing to find. You've been in town 12 hours and already everyone knows you refused Jacob Mercer. They'll know why, and they'll make sure you don't find work anywhere within 100 miles. So what do you suggest? Walter was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, tired rather than angry. I suggest you stay, take the job, do the work. Let me handle the town. Handle them how? I don't know yet. But maybe if people see you're just here to cook, that you're professional, dedicated, not causing problems, maybe they'll come around. Or maybe they'll make both our lives hell until I leave anyway. Maybe. He met her eyes. But you've already come this far. Might as well see it through. It wasn't encouragement. It was resignation. But it was also the closest thing to support she'd gotten since arriving. Fine, Mara said. Show me the cookhouse. The cookhouse was exactly what it sounded like. A building dedicated to feeding men who worked hard and expected fuel, not fancy cuisine. Large kitchen with a cast iron stove that looked older than the town. 2 long tables with benches, storage room, and in the back, a small bedroom that was apparently hers. The room held a bed, a chair, a washstand, and nothing else. The window looked out at the barn. The walls were thin enough that she could hear wind moving through gaps in the boards. It was the worst room she'd ever slept in. It was also hers, earned, not given. The first space she'd had that belonged to her and not her father's landlord, or the factory dormitory, or a hotel charging robbery rates. She set down her trunk and allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of overwhelming despair. Then she got to work. The kitchen was filthy. Not neglected for weeks filthy. Neglected for years filthy. The stove was caked with grease. The counters were scarred and stained. The storage room held supplies that were poorly organized and probably half expired. Whoever had been cooking here before had been doing it as a chore, not a craft. Mara tied back her hair, rolled up her sleeves, and started scrubbing. She worked until her hands were raw and her back screamed, cleaned the stove until she could see actual iron, scoured the counters with sand and determination, sorted through supplies, making lists of what was usable and what needed replacing. By the time she heard voices outside, the hands coming back from whatever Sunday leisure looked like on a ranch, she'd transformed the space from disaster to merely grim. She straightened, wiped sweat from her face, and waited. The door opened. Men filed in, loud and cold and expecting dinner. They stopped when they saw her. There were 8 of them, ages ranging from maybe 20 to past 50, all wearing the same expression of confusion and something darker. "Who are you?" one of them asked. Young, aggressive chin, eyes that swept over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Maribel Bell, new cook." "Where's Henry?" "I don't know. I started today." The young one looked at the others. Grins started forming. "Walt hired a woman cook?" "Walt hired a cook," Mara said. "Gender's irrelevant." "You sure about that?" He stepped closer. "Because out here, gender's pretty relevant, especially when it comes to—" "Garrett." The voice came from an older man in the back. Graying beard, face like weathered leather. "Shut up and sit down." Garrett's grin faltered. "I'm just saying, Carl, seems strange that—" "I said sit." The authority in Carl's voice was absolute. Garrett sat. The others followed, settling onto benches with the scrape of wood and boots. Mara stood at the stove, heart hammering. "Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes. "What are we having?" someone asked. She looked at what she'd found in the storage room, what she could actually make with limited supplies and time. "Beef stew, biscuits, coffee." "Henry made stew," Garrett muttered. "Tasted like boot leather." "Then I guess you'll find out if I'm an improvement." She turned her back on them and started cooking. It was a gamble, showing them her back, her vulnerability. But she'd learned in the factory that men respected competence more than fear. If she flinched, they'd tear her apart. If she worked, they might give her a chance. The kitchen filled with sounds, sizzling meat, chopping vegetables, the hiss of water meeting hot iron. Mara moved through it like she was back in the cannery, all muscle memory and efficiency. This was what she knew. This was where she was certain. 20 minutes later, she served dinner. The stew was good. Not great. She didn't have the ingredients for great. But it was hot, properly seasoned, with meat that was actually tender. The biscuits were golden and fluffy. The coffee was strong enough to keep them warm through evening chores. The men ate in silence. Not hostile silence. Evaluating silence. She cleaned as they ate, giving them space, not trying to insert herself into their world. When they were done, Carl stood. That was decent. "Thank you. Henry couldn't cook worth a damn. You're already better." Garrett made a sound that might have been agreement or mockery. "You got a problem, Garrett?" Carl asked. "Just seems strange. Woman out here alone, living with a bunch of men. What's Walt thinking?" "Walt's thinking he wants edible food for once. Beyond that, it's none of your concern. Town's gonna talk." "Town always talks. That's what they do instead of working." Carl looked at Mara. "You need anything? You let me know. I'm foreman here. What I say goes." "I appreciate that." He nodded and headed out. The others followed in rough order of age, youngest last. Garrett lingered in the doorway. "Heard you turned down Jacob Mercer," he said. Mara kept washing dishes. "News travels fast. You must be crazy. Jacob's rich, respectable, would have solved all your problems." "Jacob would have been a different set of problems." "So you'd rather be here? Cooking for cowboys? Getting talked about like you're some kind of what?" Garrett's smirk widened. "You know what? Say it. Why? You already know." He left laughing. Mara stood at the sink, hands in dishwater, shaking with rage she couldn't express and fear she wouldn't acknowledge. This was just the first day. She had 6 months of this. Quizás. That night, alone in her small room, Mara unpacked her trunk completely, for the first time since leaving Philadelphia. Her clothes, practical and worn. The photograph of her father, taken before the factory fire, when he still believed work would set him free. Her mother's recipe book, the only thing she'd taken from their apartment. And at the bottom, wrapped in cloth, the knife set her father had given her for her 21st birthday. "If you're going to cook," he'd said, lungs already starting to fail, "cook like you mean it." She meant it. Mara set the knives on the small table beside her bed, laid out her mother's recipes, looked at her father's face in the photograph, the pride in his eyes that had never quite survived contact with reality. "I'm still here," she said to the silence. "They haven't broken me yet." Outside, Wyoming winter settled in for the long haul. Wind howled against weak walls, snow piled against windows, and somewhere in town people were talking about her, the woman who refused rescue, who thought she could survive alone, who didn't understand how things worked. Let them talk. She had work to do. The first week passed in a blur of work that left Mara's hands bleeding and her pride intact. She woke before dawn every morning, lit the stove while her breath still fogged in the freezing air, and had coffee ready by the time the hands stumbled in for breakfast. Eggs, bacon, flapjacks, biscuits, nothing fancy but hot and plentiful. They ate without talking much, shoveled food like it was fuel, and left. She spent the mornings cleaning what the previous cook had neglected for what must have been years. Found mouse droppings in the flour bins, discovered pots with rust eating through the bottoms, threw out supplies that had gone rancid so long ago they'd achieved new and disturbing colors. By the second week, she'd established a rhythm. The hands knew when meals would be ready. They stopped testing her with stupid questions and crude jokes. Carl enforced a rough kind of order. No harassment, no lingering after meals, no comments about her appearance or situation. Garrett still pushed boundaries, but even he'd learned to keep his mouth shut when Carl was around. It should have been enough. The work was hard but honest. The pay was real. She had a roof, a stove, and something resembling respect from men who'd started out looking at her like she was a problem waiting to happen. But the town wouldn't let it be enough. On Saturday morning, Walter came to the cookhouse with an expression that meant trouble. "There's an issue," he said without preamble. Mara was kneading bread dough, her hands white with flour. "What kind of issue?" "The general store. Tom Brennan's refusing to extend the ranch credit unless—" He stopped. "Unless what?" "Unless I let you go." Her hands stilled in the dough. "He said that explicitly?" "Not in those words, but the meaning was clear. He's concerned about the moral character of his business associations. Says he can't in good conscience support an operation that's become a source of scandal." "Scandal!" Mara punched the dough harder than necessary. "I've been here 2 weeks. I cook meals and stay in my room. What scandal?" "You exist. That's scandal enough." "So fire me." Walter looked genuinely surprised. "I'm not going to fire you." "Why not? Would solve all your problems, make the town happy, let you get back to business as usual." "Because you're the best cook this ranch has seen in a decade. Because you're doing exactly what I hired you to do. And because I'm not going to let Tom Brennan dictate how I run my operation." He paused. "But we do need supplies. And if he won't sell to us, that's a real problem." "There's another store?" 50 miles east. Not practical for regular supply runs." Mara shaped the dough into loaves with sharp, angry movements. "So what do you want me to do?" "I'm going into town this afternoon. Going to talk to Tom face to face, see if we can reach some kind of understanding. An understanding that doesn't involve me leaving. That's the goal. And if he won't budge?" Walter's jaw tightened. "Then we'll deal with that when we come to it." He left. Mara finished the bread and slammed it into the oven with enough force to rattle the stove. 2 weeks. She'd survived 2 weeks, and already they were trying to starve her out indirectly. That afternoon, she watched through the window as Walter drove the wagon toward town. The sky was low and gray, threatening snow that hadn't yet decided to fall. Wind rattled the cookhouse walls. She should have felt worried. Instead, she felt furious. The hands came in for dinner at their usual time. Mara served roast chicken with gravy, mashed potatoes, green beans she'd managed to resurrect from dubious canned stock. They ate like they always did, mechanically, gratefully, without much conversation. Halfway through the meal, Garrett looked up. "Heard Walt went to town." "He did," Mara said. "Heard Tom Brennan's cutting us off. Account of you." Carl shot him a look. Garrett.
What? It's true, ain't it?
Whole town's talking about how we got a woman here, living with men, no husband, no chaperone, saying it ain't right. Whole town needs to find better entertainment, Carl said. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Garrett turned to Mara. You could fix this easy. Marry Jacob Mercer like he wanted. Or leave. Either one stops the talk. I'm not interested in stopping talk, Mara said. I'm interested in doing my job. Your job's causing problems. No, their judgment is causing problems. There's a difference. A younger hand named Samuel spoke up, surprising everyone. I think she's right. We're getting better food than we've had in years. What's it matter if she's married or not? It matters because reputation matters, Garrett said. You think other ranches are going to respect the Bar W if we're running some kind of a... Finish that sentence, Carl interrupted, his voice deadly quiet, and you're going to find out what unemployment looks like in winter. Garrett shut up, but his eyes, when they met Mara's, were full of resentment that had nowhere useful to go. The meal finished in tense silence. The men filed out. Mara cleaned up, scrubbing plates with more force than necessary, trying to work out anger that kept building with nowhere to release it. She was drying the last pot when the door opened again. It wasn't one of the hands. It was a woman, maybe 35, wearing a coat that had been good quality once and now showed careful mending, brown hair pinned up neatly, face that might have been pretty if it wasn't so tight with anxiety. Miss Bell? The woman asked. Yes. I'm sorry to intrude. I'm Grace Morrison. I run the boarding house in town. Mara set down the pot. What can I do for you, Mrs. Morrison?
It's Miss. I'm not married. Grace stepped inside and closed the door quickly against the cold. I need to speak with you. It's important. About what? About my daughter. That wasn't what Mara had expected. I don't understand.
Grace pulled off her gloves with sharp, nervous movements. Elsie, my daughter, she's 14. Smart girl? Too smart for this town, honestly. She reads everything she can get her hands on, asks questions that make people uncomfortable. Grace stopped, gathered herself. She's been talking about you. Me? About how you came west alone, took a job, refused to marry a stranger just because people said you should. She thinks you're... Grace's mouth twisted. She thinks you're brave. Mara waited. There was more coming, and it wasn't going to be pleasant. The problem is, other mothers don't see it that way. They think you're setting a bad example, teaching young girls that they don't need husbands or protection or propriety, that they can just strike out on their own and consequences be damned. And you agree with them? No. The word came out fierce. I don't. I came west alone too, 15 years ago, took work as a teacher. The town barely tolerated me until I opened the boarding house and became useful in ways they understood. I know exactly what you're up against. Then what do you want? I want to warn you and ask for your help. Mara crossed her arms. Warn me about what? The women in town are organizing. They're planning to petition the county to have you removed. Claim you're a public nuisance, a moral threat. They'll go to the sheriff if they have to. On what grounds? I haven't broken any laws. They don't need grounds. They just need consensus. And right now, consensus is that you're dangerous. Grace moved closer. But here's the thing. If Elsie gets caught up in this, if people start saying she's being corrupted by your example, they'll take it out on me, on my business. I can't afford that. So you want me to what? Leave? Stop being whatever it is they think I am? No, I want you to talk to her. That genuinely surprised Mara. Talk to your daughter. Tell her the truth. Tell her what it's really like to do what you're doing, the hardship, the isolation, the constant fight. She's romanticizing it because she's young and this town is suffocating her. But if she understands the reality, maybe she'll stop talking about following your example. Mara stared at this woman who'd shown up uninvited to ask her to disillusion a girl who thought hope was possible. You want me to crush your daughter's dreams, Mara said slowly, so the town stops blaming you for my existence. Grace flinched. That's not... It's more complicated than that. Is it? You don't have children. You don't understand what it's like trying to protect someone in a place like this. Every day is a calculation. What can I let her read? Who can she talk to? What ideas are too dangerous to let take root? I'm trying to keep her safe until she's old enough to make her own choices. She's 14. When exactly is she going to be old enough? I don't know, Grace's composure cracked. But not now. Not when the whole town is watching and waiting for her to step out of line so they can judge me for failing to raise her properly. The desperation in her voice was real. So was the fear. Mara recognized both, had felt them herself often enough. Bring her by tomorrow afternoon, Mara said, after the midday meal. I'll talk to her. And I'll tell her the truth. All of it. What happens after that is between you and her. Grace looked like she wanted to argue, to pin down exactly what Mara meant by truth, but she just nodded. Thank you. She left quickly, like staying too long might contaminate her. Mara went back to cleaning, but her mind was elsewhere. A 14-year-old girl who thought refusing marriage was brave. Women organizing to have her removed. A whole town coordinating to make her leave. She'd known it would be hard, but she'd thought the hard part would be the work, the isolation, the physical demands of frontier life. She hadn't understood that the hardest part would be existing. Walter returned after dark, his face grim in the lamplight. Tom's not budging, he said without being asked. He's prepared to lose our business entirely. Says his conscience won't allow him to profit from sin. Sin, Mara repeated. His word, not mine. What about the other merchants? They'll follow Tom's lead. He's been here longest, carries the most influence. If he says we're morally suspect, the others will fall in line. So we're cut off. From local supply, yes. I can make runs to Rollins. That's the town 50 miles east. But that's a 2-day trip each way, minimum. In winter, longer. We can't do that regularly. Mara thought about the supplies she had left. Maybe 3 weeks if she was careful. A month if she got creative. There's another option, Walter said. I'm not leaving. I wasn't going to suggest that. He pulled out a chair and sat heavily. But we need to think strategically. The town's not going to come around because we ignore them. We need to change the narrative. How? By making you indispensable. Not to the ranch, to the town itself. They hate me. They hate the idea of you, the scandal. But they're practical people. If you became useful enough, valuable enough, they'd find ways to overlook their moral concerns. Useful how? Walter leaned forward. The town's having a harvest festival in 3 weeks. It's a big event. Brings in people from surrounding ranches, some from Rollins. Usually there's a cooking competition. Cash prize, bragging rights. It's taken seriously. You want me to enter a cooking competition? I want you to win, publicly. Show the whole town what you can do. If they see you as talented rather than scandalous, it changes the equation. Or it gives them another reason to hate me. Maybe. But right now they hate you anyway. At least this way, you're fighting back. Mara considered it. A cooking competition meant exposure, judgment, direct confrontation with people who'd already decided she was wrong just by existing. It also meant a chance to prove she was better than their prejudice. Fine, she said. I'll do it. Walter looked relieved. I'll get you entered. The competition's in 3 weeks. That give you enough time to prepare? I've been preparing my whole life. The next afternoon, Grace Morrison returned with her daughter. Elsie was tall for 14, all awkward angles and potential. She had her mother's brown hair but sharper features, and eyes that looked at Mara with something close to worship. Miss Bell, she said, voice breathless. I can't believe I'm actually meeting you. It's just Mara, Mara said. Come in. You want coffee? I'm not allowed coffee, Elsie said. Then with a glance at her mother, but I'd love some. Grace looked like she might object, then just sighed. 1 cup. They sat at the long table where the ranch hands ate. Mara poured coffee for all 3 of them, watching Elsie try not to make a face at the bitter taste. Your mother says you've been asking about me, Mara said. Everyone's talking about you, how you refused to marry Jacob Mercer, how you're working here even though the whole town thinks it's wrong. Elsie leaned forward. Is it true? Did you really come all the way from Philadelphia by yourself? I did. Weren't you scared? Terrified. That seemed to surprise Elsie. But you did it anyway. Being scared doesn't mean you can't do something. It just means you're aware of the risks. But you took the job, even knowing people would judge you. Mara sipped her coffee, choosing words carefully. I took the job because I needed money. Because I'd spent everything getting here and couldn't afford to go back. It wasn't brave. It was necessary. That's still brave. No. Brave would have been having other options and choosing this anyway. I chose this because all my other options were worse. Grace relaxed slightly, like this was going the way she'd hoped. But Elsie wasn't finished. Do you regret it? Regret what? Refusing to marry Jacob. Choosing to work instead of being safe. Safe, Mara said, is a complicated word. Safe for who? Safe how? Jacob would have owned me. Everything I earned, every choice I made, every moment of my day, all his to control. Is that safe? Or is that just a different kind of danger? Mara, Grace said quietly, that's not what we're... She asked me to tell the truth. This is the truth. Mara kept her eyes on Elsie. Marriage might have solved certain problems, but it would have created others. And I decided I'd rather face the problems I could control than submit to ones I couldn't. So you don't think women should get married? Elsie asked. I think women should be able to choose. Marry if they want to, work if they want to, live alone if they want to. The problem isn't marriage, it's that it's treated as the only acceptable option. That's exactly what I've been saying, Elsie turned to her mother. See? Grace's expression had gone tight again. Elsie, Miss Bell's situation is different than yours. How? She's older, more experienced. She's already... Grace stopped, recalibrating. You're 14. You have time. Time for what? To be shaped into someone acceptable? To learn to be quiet and agreeable and small enough that I don't threaten anyone? To grow up, Grace said firmly. To understand that principles are fine, but survival requires compromise. Survival, Elsie said bitterly. You mean surrender. I mean living long enough to fight battles that matter. They stared at each other, this mother and daughter separated by a gulf of years and fear and understanding that couldn't quite bridge the gap. Mara recognized the argument. She'd had versions of it with her own father. He'd wanted her to marry, settle, accept limitations. She'd wanted to work, to matter, to be more than someone's wife. They'd both been right and both been wrong, and he died before they could find the middle ground. Elsie, Mara said, what your mother's trying to tell you is that being right doesn't protect you. I'm right. I know I'm right. That I should be able to work without needing permission from a husband. But being right hasn't stopped the town from trying to force me out. Being right hasn't gotten the general store to sell me supplies. Being right hasn't made a single person in Coldwater Junction treat me like I'm human instead of scandalous. But you're still here. For now. But I don't know if I'll last the week, let alone the month. They're starving me out economically. They're organizing to have me legally removed, and all because I insisted on being right instead of being acceptable. So you think I should just accept it? Marry whoever they pick? Spend my life cooking and cleaning and pretending I don't have thoughts? No. I think you should understand what you're choosing. If you decide to fight, really fight, it's going to cost you everything. Friends, reputation, opportunities, safety. Most days you'll be exhausted and alone and wondering why you bothered. And the people you're fighting against won't learn or change or suddenly realize they were wrong. They'll just dig in harder. But you haven't quit. I haven't had time to quit yet. Ask me again in 6 months. Elsie studied her with those two sharp eyes. You're trying to scare me. I'm trying to be honest. Your mother asked me to tell you what this is really like. This is really like. Mara gestured around the empty cookhouse. Isolation, constant judgment. Working twice as hard for half the respect. Lying awake wondering if you're making a terrible mistake or just making the only mistake you can live with. Do you think you're making a mistake? Mara considered the question seriously. I think I'm making the only choice I could make and still be able to look at myself. Whether that's wisdom or stupidity, I honestly don't know yet. Grace stood abruptly. We should go. Elsie has chores and I've taken enough of Miss Bell's time. Elsie didn't move. Thank you, she said to Mara, for being honest. Thank you for listening. They left. Mara watched them walk back toward town through snow that had finally started falling in earnest. Grace's posture was rigid with controlled anger. Elsie's was slouched with teenage disappointment. Mara had done what Grace asked, told the truth, showed the hard edges and sharp costs of the choice she'd made. She just wasn't sure which one of them she'd actually helped. The days blurred together after that. Mara cooked, cleaned, and prepared for the festival competition with a focus that bordered on obsessive. She went through her mother's recipe book, testing dishes, refining techniques, working with limited supplies to create something extraordinary. The hands noticed the improved food quality and asked no questions. Carl mentioned once that meals had gotten fancy, then went back to eating without complaint. Walter made the long run to Rollins for supplies, came back exhausted and determined not to show it. The trip had cost 3 days and more money than it should have. They both knew this wasn't sustainable. Meanwhile, the town's campaign against her continued in ways both direct and subtle. Someone spread a rumor that she was running a brothel out of the cookhouse. It was absurd enough that even sympathetic people laughed. But the laughter had an edge. Jokes about impropriety, about what really went on at the Bar W after dark, about whether the hands were getting more than just meals. The petition Grace had warned about materialized. Mara saw it when she made a rare trip into town for salt the general store had accidentally left out where she could reach it. Mrs. Brennan, Tom's wife, was collecting signatures outside the church. The petition called for the county to investigate moral irregularities at the Bar W ranch. 15 women had already signed. Mara bought her salt, ignored the stares, and walked back to the ranch through snow that was getting deeper. Winter was settling in hard, temperature dropping, days getting shorter. The kind of cold that killed people who didn't take it seriously. She took it seriously. Back at the cookhouse, she found a letter tucked under the door. No name, no return address. Just a single page with neat handwriting. Leave now while you still can. Winter's coming. Accidents happen. We take care of our own, and you're not one of us. It wasn't signed. Mara burned it in the stove and went back to planning her competition menu. The night before the festival, she couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, listening to wind tear at the building, and thought about Philadelphia, the factory. Her father's cough that never stopped. The moment she'd decided this had to be better than that. Maybe she'd been wrong. Maybe this was worse in ways she hadn't predicted. Colder, lonelier, more hostile than industrial machinery and toxic air. Or maybe it was exactly the same fight in different clothes. People with power deciding who deserved dignity. Systems designed to keep certain people in certain places. The presumption that existing outside accepted boundaries was threat enough to justify punishment. She'd fought that in Philadelphia and lost. Her father had died anyway. The factory had moved on without her. All that resistance had bought her nothing but scars. But she was still here, still fighting, too stubborn to quit, too angry to surrender, too committed to the idea that she had the right to exist on her own terms, to let anyone, not the town, not economics, not winter itself, force her back into the box they'd built for women like her. Morning came with clear skies and killing cold. Mara dressed carefully. Not fancy. She didn't own fancy. But clean. Professional. She braided her hair tight, put on her best shirt, and packed her supplies with the precision of someone going to battle, because that's what this was. Battle. Walter drove her into town in the wagon. They didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say. The festival was in full swing by the time they arrived. Main Street had been cleared of snow. Booths selling everything from hand-knit scarves to doubtful medicinal tonics lined both sides. Children ran between adults, high on sugar and freedom. The whole town had turned out, plus people from surrounding ranches, some who'd traveled 2 days just for this. The cooking competition was in the church basement. Mara carried her supplies down stairs that creaked under her weight and entered a room that fell silent. 6 other competitors, all women, all looking at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. The organizer was Mrs. Brennan, which explained the hostile edge. She looked at Mara like she'd found something unpleasant stuck to her shoe. "Miss Bell," she said coldly, "we weren't sure you'd actually show. I'm entered. I'm here." "Yes. Well." Mrs. Brennan consulted her list. "You'll be at Station 4. You have 2 hours to prepare a complete meal, main dish, side, and dessert. Judging begins at 1 o'clock sharp." "Who's judging?" "Myself, Mrs. Patterson, and Mr. Mercer." Of course, Jacob Mercer, the man she'd refused, sitting in judgment of her cooking. "That seems like a conflict of interest," Mara said. "Mr. Mercer is a pillar of this community with impeccable taste. His presence on the judging panel is an honor." "I'm sure it is." Mara found Station 4 and set up her supplies. The other women were already working, careful not to look at her directly. She recognized two of them from the petition signing. One was Mrs. Patterson's daughter, which explained that judges' probable bias. 3 judges, 2 of whom were guaranteed to score her low. She'd need to cook perfectly just to place. Fine. She'd cook perfectly. The church basement filled with the sounds of cooking, sizzling, chopping, the clatter of pots and pans. Mara lost herself in the rhythm of it, the thing she knew better than anything else. Her hands moved automatically, knife work precise, timing instinctive. She was making roasted chicken with herb butter, glazed carrots and parsnips, fresh rolls, and an apple tart with a lattice crust that required patience and precision. Nothing revolutionary, just fundamentals executed flawlessly. An hour in, she noticed people gathering at the top of the stairs, watching. The competition had become entertainment, and she was the scandal everyone wanted to see fail. She ignored them and kept working. 30 minutes left. Her chicken was resting, vegetables were perfect, rolls golden. The tart just needed 10 more minutes. Then she smelled smoke. Not her station. Behind her. She turned and saw flames licking up from Station 3. Grease fire, spreading fast. The woman at Station 3 screamed and stumbled backward. Others shouted. Someone ran for water. Mara grabbed the lid from her largest pot, moved to Station 3, and smothered the flames before they could spread. The fire died with a hiss of angry smoke. The woman, Mrs. Patterson's daughter, stared at her with wide, shocked eyes. "You all right?" Mara asked.
Yes, thank you. I don't know what happened. The grease it happens." Mara handed back the pot lid. "Check your stove temperature. Might be running too hot." She went back to her own station. Behind her, she heard whispered conversations, surprised tones. Apparently helping competitors wasn't expected. Apparently being human was still revolutionary. The 2 hours ended. Mara plated her meal with the same care she'd shown every meal she'd cooked at the ranch. Presentation mattered. Respect for the food mattered. Respect for herself mattered most of all. The judges made their rounds. Mrs. Brennan barely looked at Mara's plate. Mrs. Patterson was slightly more polite, but no less cold. They moved on quickly, spending more time with the other contestants, asking questions, making encouraging noises. Then Jacob Mercer stopped at her station. He looked at her plate for a long moment, then at her. "Miss Bell," he said. "Mr. Mercer. This looks well prepared." "Thank you." He cut into the chicken, tasted it. His expression didn't change. He tried the vegetables, the roll. Finally, a bite of the tart. "You're a skilled cook," he said. "I know." Something almost like respect flickered across his face. "I misjudged you. When we met, I thought you were simply stubborn, but this," he gestured at the plate, "this is craftsmanship. It's my job. It's more than that." He set down his fork. "I'm going to score you honestly. You should know that won't make you popular." "I'm already not popular." "True." He moved to the next station. The judging took another hour. Mara cleaned her station, packed her supplies, and waited while the town whispered and stared. Finally, Mrs. Brennan stood to announce the results. 3rd place went to a woman who'd made a competent but unremarkable pot roast. 2nd place to Mrs. Patterson's daughter, which surprised no one. And 1st place, Mrs. Brennan said, her voice tight with something that might have been rage or resignation, goes to Miss Maribel Bell. The room erupted, not with applause, with shock and anger and disbelief that somehow she'd won despite everything stacked against her. Mara walked forward to accept her ribbon and the $20 prize. Mrs. Brennan handed them over like they physically hurt her. "Congratulations," she said, the word forced through clenched teeth. "Thank you." Mara turned to face the room full of people who hated that she'd won, but couldn't deny that she'd earned it. "I appreciate this recognition," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I look forward to competing again next year." It was a declaration. She wasn't leaving. She wasn't surrendering. She was staying, and they'd have to get used to it. The victory changed nothing and everything at once. Mara walked out of that church basement with $20 and a ribbon, and the crowd parted like she carried disease. Nobody congratulated her except Walter, who looked grimly satisfied, and Jacob Mercer, who nodded once before disappearing into the festival crowd. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Snow had started falling again, thick and purposeful. Walter kept his eyes on the road while Mara held the ribbon in her lap,
watching it flutter in the wind that found every gap in the wagon's cover. "You made enemies today," Walter said finally. "I had enemies yesterday. More now. Mrs. Brennan's face when she had to announce your name. I've never seen anyone look that angry about giving out a prize." "She'll get over it." "Will she?" Walter glanced at her. "You're not from here. You don't understand how long people hold grudges out west. Years. Decades. They'll die angry rather than admit they were wrong. Then they can die angry. I'm not apologizing for being good at what I do." He almost smiled at that. "No, I don't suppose you are." They made it back to the ranch just as the snow turned serious. Big flakes falling fast, the kind that meant tomorrow would be white and impassable. Mara climbed down from the wagon with her supplies and stood for a moment in the gathering storm, feeling winter settle onto the land like a hand pressing down. Inside the cookhouse, she hung up her coat and started dinner. The hands would be hungry. They were always hungry. And the weather meant they'd need something that would stick. Beef stew, she decided. Biscuits, strong coffee. She was browning meat when the door banged open and Garrett stumbled in, covered in snow and grinning like he'd won something. "Heard you took first place," he said. "News travels fast. Town's talking about nothing else. Half of them saying you cheated, other half saying the judges were biased toward you." He laughed at his own joke. "Can't win either way, can you? I won the competition. That's enough." "Is it?" He moved closer, and she could smell whiskey underneath the cold. "Because seems to me you just painted a bigger target on your back. People don't like being shown up, especially by someone they already decided doesn't belong. Then they shouldn't have let me enter." "Oh, they're regretting that now." Garrett leaned against the counter, too casual, taking up too much space. "But hey, at least you got $20 out of it. That'll buy you, what, 2 weeks of supplies? 3 if you're careful?" Mara kept her eyes on the stove. "That's none of your concern." "Everything that happens on this ranch is my concern. I work here. And when the boss's decisions start affecting my employment, I pay attention. If you have issues with Walter's decisions, take them up with Walter." "Already did. He says you're staying through winter regardless of what the town thinks. Says he's not going to be bullied into firing good help." Garrett's grin widened. "That what you are? Good help?" "I do my job." "Yeah, you do. Cook real nice, keep things clean, never cause trouble with the hands." He paused. "Of course, trouble seems to find you anyway." Carl's voice cut through from the doorway. "Garrett, you got something useful to say, or you just here to run your mouth?" Garrett straightened, the grin fading slightly. "Just making conversation." "Make it elsewhere. Miss Bell's got dinner to cook, and you're in her way. I was just elsewhere, now." Garrett left, but his eyes promised this conversation wasn't finished. Carl watched him go, then turned to Mara. "Did he give you trouble, you tell me," Carl said. "I don't care that he's been here 3 years. Disrespect doesn't get a pass on this ranch." "I can handle Garrett." "I know you can. I'm saying you shouldn't have to." He pulled off his hat, shook snow from it. "Storm's getting worse. Might want to make extra tonight. We're likely to be stuck inside for a couple days." He was right. By morning, the world had disappeared under 2 feet of snow, and more was falling. Mara woke to silence so complete it felt wrong. No wind, no animal sounds, just the muffled weight of winter burying everything. She lit the stove and started coffee, watching through the window as shapes moved through the white. The hands, checking on the horses, making sure water troughs weren't frozen solid. Hard, cold work that would leave them exhausted and starving. Breakfast was eggs, bacon, flapjacks, and determination. The men ate without talking much, focused on the food and the work ahead. This was survival weather. Everything else, scandal, competition results, town politics, didn't matter when the temperature was trying to kill you. The storm lasted 3 days. Mara cooked, cleaned, and kept the stove burning while snow piled against the windows and wind found new and creative ways to get inside. The cookhouse wasn't built for this kind of cold. Ice formed on the inside of her bedroom window. Her water pitcher froze solid overnight. She slept in her coat and still woke shivering. But she kept working. On the 4th morning, she woke to stillness and knew something was wrong. The silence was different, sharper, the kind that came before bad news. She dressed quickly and went to the main room. Carl was already there, standing by the window with an expression that meant trouble. "What is it?" Mara asked.
2 men didn't come back last night. Her stomach dropped. Who? Samuel and Davis. They went to check the south fence line yesterday afternoon. Should have been back by dark. They could have taken shelter, found a line shack, or... They could have. Or they could be frozen in a drift somewhere. Carl pulled on his coat. Walt's organizing a search party. We're heading out in 10 minutes. I'm coming. No, you're not. We need someone here maintaining heat and food. If we find them and they're still alive, they'll need warming up fast. That's your job. He left before she could argue. Mara watched through the window as 6 men mounted horses and rode out into a landscape that was beautiful and deadly in equal measure. The sky was clear now, painfully blue, and the sun on snow was bright enough to hurt. She went back to the kitchen and started preparing. Hot soup, strong coffee, blankets warming by the stove. Everything she could think of for hypothermia treatment based on a medical book she'd read once and common sense that said, get warm fast or die. Hours passed. Mara kept the fire going, kept soup simmering, and tried not to imagine what 6 men might find in all that white silence. It was past noon when she heard horses. She ran to the door and saw them coming back, but not all of them. 4 men on horses, 2 bodies draped across saddles. Her heart stopped. Then one of the bodies moved, and she realized they weren't dead, just close. Get them inside, Carl shouted. Move! They carried Samuel and Davis into the cookhouse. Both men were gray-faced, shaking uncontrollably, barely conscious. Their clothes were frozen stiff. Ice crusted their beards and eyebrows. What happened? Mara asked, already grabbing blankets. Found them in a ravine, Carl said. Horse through Samuel, broke through ice on a creek. Davis tried to help, got soaked too. They were trying to start a fire when we found them, but their hands weren't working right. Mara had read about this. Hypothermia. Frostbite. The kind of cold that shut down your body piece by piece until you just stopped. We need to warm them gradually, she said. Too fast and we could kill them. Get their wet clothes off. Wrap them in dry blankets. I'll get warm, not hot. Water and soup. The men looked at her like she'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. Are you sure? Walter asked. Maybe we should... I'm sure. Do it now. Something in her voice cut through their hesitation. They moved, following her orders, stripping wet clothes and wrapping the 2 men in every blanket the cookhouse had. Mara brought warm water, made them drink it slowly despite their shaking hands wanting to gulp. Brought soup 1 spoonful at a time. Samuel was talking, confused, rambling, but talking. That was good. Davis was quiet, staring at nothing, which was worse. Davis, Mara said sharply, look at me. He blinked slowly, eyes trying to focus. You're going to be fine, she said. But I need you to stay with me. Keep your eyes open. Can you do that? Cold, he mumbled. I know, we're fixing that. But you have to stay awake. Talk to me. Tell me about your horse. My horse? Yeah. What's his name? Thunder. Why'd you name him Thunder? Davis's eyes focused slightly. Loud. When he runs, sounds like thunder. That's good. Keep talking. Tell me about the first time you rode him. She kept him talking while monitoring his temperature, his color, his breathing, kept Samuel drinking soup and water, checked their fingers and toes for frostbite, found some, but not catastrophic. They'd probably lose a few toes, maybe a finger or 2. But they'd live. The hands stood around watching her work with something like awe. This wasn't cooking. This was medical care, crisis management, the kind of competence that had nothing to do with gender and everything to do with keeping people alive. By evening, both men were stable, still weak, still recovering, but out of immediate danger. Mara set up beds for them near the stove where she could monitor them through the night, made rounds checking their vitals, adjusting blankets, making sure they stayed warm without overheating. Walter found her around midnight, still awake, watching the 2 sleeping men. You saved their lives, he said quietly. I did my job. That's not your job. You're a cook. Today I was more than a cook. He sat down across from her, exhaustion written into every line of his face. When Carl came back and said they were alive, but barely, I thought we'd lose them for sure. I've seen hypothermia before. Usually by the time you find someone, it's too late. You found them early enough, and I knew what to do. How? I read a lot. Medical texts, mostly, back in Philadelphia. Figured if I understood how bodies worked, I'd be a better cook. Turns out it's useful for more than just food.
Walter shook his head slowly.
You're full of surprises. I'm full of whatever it takes to survive. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the fire crackle, and the two men breathed steadily in their sleep. The town's going to hear about this, Walter said, about you saving two of my hands. That might change some minds. Or it'll make them angrier. Harder to justify hating someone who saves lives, but people will find a way.
You're probably right. He stood. Get some sleep. I'll watch them for a few hours. I'm fine. Mara, sleep. That's not a request. She was too tired to argue. She went to her room, lay down fully dressed, and fell into dreamless sleep that felt like falling into a well. Morning came with complications. Samuel's fever had spiked overnight. Davis was better but complaining of pain in his hands and feet, the frostbite making itself known. Both men needed care that went beyond what the cookhouse could provide. We need a doctor, Mara said. Nearest doctor's in Rawlins, Carl said. That's 2 days in good weather. In this? He gestured at the window where fresh snow was falling. Might as well be the moon.
Then we manage it ourselves. Mara checked Samuel's temperature again. Too high. Fever means infection or his body fighting the cold. Either way, we need to keep it down without chilling him again. She spent the day doing exactly that. Cool cloths on Samuel's forehead, monitoring both men constantly, adjusting their care based on symptoms that changed hour by hour. The hands helped when she told them what to do, following her orders without question now. By evening, Samuel's fever had broken. He was weak but coherent, asking for food in a voice that sounded more alive than dead. Can you eat soup? Mara asked. I could eat a horse. Beef stew's the best I can do. He managed half a bowl before exhaustion took him under again. But he'd eaten. That was progress. Davis was sitting up now, examining his hands with the grim acceptance of someone who knew he was looking at permanent damage. His fingers were black at the tips. 2 of them might be saved. The others were already dead tissue. I'm going to lose them, aren't I? He asked Mara. She didn't lie. Probably. But you're alive to lose them. That counts for something. Does it? Ask your family. Ask Thunder. Ask yourself if you'd rather be dead with all your fingers intact.
He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Yeah. All right. I see your point. The storm finally broke on the 6th day. Mara woke to sunlight streaming through windows and silence that meant the wind had finally stopped. She got up, checked on her patients, both sleeping peacefully, and went outside for the first time in almost a week. The world was transformed. Snow everywhere, clean and blinding white. The ranch buildings looked like they'd been carved from ice. Icicles hung from every roof edge, some of them longer than her arm. It was beautiful and terrible, this landscape that could kill you while looking like something from a storybook. Carl found her standing there, breath fogging in air so cold it hurt. They're saying in town the storm was punishment, he said. Punishment for what? For harboring sin, for allowing immoral behavior to go unchallenged. He looked at her. They're saying if Walt had fired you like they wanted, the storm wouldn't have been so bad. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Doesn't matter if it's stupid. People believe it, and now they're more convinced than ever that you're the problem. I saved 2 men's lives. I know that. You know that. But to them, you're still the woman who refused marriage and brought shame to the whole community. Saving lives doesn't erase that sin. It just complicates the narrative. Mara turned to face him fully. What do you want me to do, Carl? Leave? Apologize? Marry some stranger to make everyone comfortable? I want you to understand what you're up against. This isn't going to get easier. Winter's just starting. We've got 3, maybe 4 more months of this weather. And every time something goes wrong, another storm, a sick cow, somebody's kid catches fever, they're going to find a way to blame you. Let them. You say that now, but it wears on you. Constant judgment, constant hostility. Eventually, you'll wonder if it's worth it. I already wonder that every single day. She met his eyes. But I'm still here. Carl studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Yeah, you are. He walked away, leaving her standing in the snow and sunlight, wondering how many more storms she'd have to survive before spring came, and with it the possibility of something other than mere survival.
The answer came sooner than she expected. 2 weeks later, Grace Morrison showed up at the ranch again. This time she wasn't alone. Elsie was with her, and the girl's face was puffy and red like she'd been crying for hours. "Miss Bell," Grace said, voice tight with controlled panic, "I need your help, committee. They've decided Elsie is being corrupted by your influence. They're demanding I send her away to a boarding school in Cheyenne to correct her thinking before it's too late." Mara looked at Elsie, who was staring at the ground. "Elsie, is that what you want?" "No," the girl whispered. "But Mother says we can't afford to fight them. If we refuse, they'll destroy her business. Nobody will stay at the boarding house. We'll lose everything." "So you came here because I don't know what else to do." Grace's composure cracked completely. "You stood up to them. You refused to back down. I thought maybe you'd have some idea how to fight this." Mara wanted to laugh at the absurdity. This woman who'd come to her weeks ago asking her to disillusion her daughter was now asking for help defying the same people she'd been afraid of. "You can't fight them," Mara said. "Not directly. They have all the power, social, economic, moral authority. If you push back, they'll crush you." "So what do I do? Just send my daughter away?" "No, you make them irrelevant." Grace blinked. "What?" "They have power because you need them. You need their approval, their business, their acceptance. But what if you didn't? What if you built something they couldn't touch?" "I don't understand." Mara was figuring it out as she spoke, the idea forming like ice crystals in cold air. "How many people stay at your boarding house?" "In winter? Maybe 5 or 6 regularly, traveling salesmen, mostly." "And how much do you make from that?" "Enough to survive. Barely." "What if instead of running a boarding house for strangers, you ran something else? Something the town needs but can't get anywhere else?" "Like what?" "A restaurant, a real one. Not the hotel dining room with its terrible biscuits. A place where people could get good food, comfortable seating, decent coffee. You've got the building, you've got the kitchen. All you need is a cook who knows what she's doing." Grace stared at her. "You?" "Me. We'd be partners. I provide the cooking expertise and recipes. You provide the space and handle the business side. We split the profits. The town would never accept it. They already hate you. They'd boycott." "Would they?" Mara leaned forward. "Think about it. Right now, if someone wants a good meal, where do they go? The hotel charges too much for food that's barely edible. The saloon serves whiskey and jerky. There's nowhere else. We open a restaurant, a real one, with quality food at fair prices. And suddenly people have to choose between their principles and their stomachs." "You think their stomachs would win?" "I know they would. I've been feeding ranch hands for 3 months. Men who came in ready to hate me left with full bellies and grudging respect. Food is universal. It crosses boundaries that words can't." Elsie looked up for the first time, hope lighting her face. "Mother, she's right. If you had your own business, really your own, not dependent on them, they couldn't threaten you anymore." "It's a huge risk," Grace said. "If it fails, then you're in the same position you're in now. But if it succeeds?" Mara met her eyes. "Then you and Elsie have independence, real independence, the kind nobody can take away." Grace was quiet for a long time, weighing risk against reward, fear against possibility. "I'll need to think about it," she said finally. "Think fast. Winter won't last forever, but people get hungry 3 times a day." They left. Grace still uncertain, Elsie looking back with something like worship in her eyes again. Mara watched them go and wondered if she'd just made things better or infinitely worse. That night at dinner, Walter announced that Davis and Samuel were being sent to Rollins to see a proper doctor. The freight wagon would take them tomorrow, weather permitting. Davis would probably lose 3 fingers. Samuel might have permanent lung damage from the cold, but they'd live. "They wanted me to tell you thanks," Walter said to Mara. "Said you saved their lives." "I did what needed doing. That's more than most people would have managed." He paused. "There's something else. Jacob Mercer stopped by this afternoon." The table went quiet. Garrett looked up with interest. Carl's expression went carefully neutral. "What did he want?" Mara asked. "To make an offer. He's willing to extend credit to the ranch again. No restrictions, no conditions about your employment." "Why the change?" "He said he's been thinking about the competition, about your cooking and your character. Said he misjudged you initially and wants to make amends." That's convenient, Garrett said, right after she saves two men's lives and the whole town's talking about it. Convenient or not, it solves our supply problem, Walter said. We can get provisions locally again without me having to make that run to Rollins every 2 weeks. Mara understood what this meant. Jacob was making a strategic retreat, acknowledging her value publicly enough that others would have to follow. It wasn't acceptance. It was calculation. But it was also progress. Did you accept? She asked. I told him I'd discuss it with you first. This affects you as much as me. Everyone stared. The idea that a ranch owner would consult his cook on business decisions was apparently revolutionary. Accept it, Mara said, but make sure the terms are clear. No strings, no expectations beyond normal business dealings. Already done. After dinner, after the hands had left and Mara was cleaning up, Carl lingered. You know what you did, don't you? He asked. Made dinner? Change the equation. Jacob Mercer backing down means others will follow. Not all of them, not quickly, but it's a crack in the wall. A crack isn't a door. No. But it's a start. He pulled on his coat. For what it's worth, I think you're going to make it. Make it to what? To spring, to summer, to whatever comes after survival becomes living. He left her alone with dishes and thoughts that wouldn't settle. Outside, stars were coming out in a sky so clear it looked like you could see forever. The kind of night that made you believe in possibilities despite every reason not to. Mara dried the last plate, hung up her apron, and stood at the window looking out at the frozen world. 3 months ago, she'd stepped off a stage into this town with nothing but determination and a trunk full of possessions. They'd tried to break her with judgment, economics, social pressure, and winter itself. She was still here. Battered, exhausted, uncertain about tomorrow. But here. And that, she was learning, was its own kind of victory. Grace Morrison showed up at the cookhouse 3 days later with a ledger, a measuring tape, and the determined expression of someone who'd made a decision that terrified her. I'm in, she said without preamble. The restaurant, partnership, whatever this is going to be. Mara set down the pot she'd been scrubbing. You're sure? No, but I'm out of better options. Grace opened the ledger, her hands shaking slightly. I've been doing calculations. If I convert the boarding house dining room into a proper restaurant, I can seat maybe 20 people comfortably. 30 if we're crowded. The kitchen needs work, but the bones are good. What changed your mind? Mrs. Brennan came by yesterday. Said she'd heard I was considering going into business with you. Warned me it would be a mistake. That the decent women of this town wouldn't be caught dead eating in a restaurant run by someone of your character. Grace's jaw tightened. Then she suggested, strongly, that I reconsider keeping Elsie in town at all. Said the boarding school option wasn't really optional anymore. So you're doing this out of spite. I'm doing this because I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of watching my daughter's spirit get crushed by people who think conformity is the same as morality. Tired of surviving instead of living. She met Mara's eyes. You asked me once if I thought Elsie would ever be old enough to make her own choices. Well, maybe it's time I made some of my own. Mara wiped her hands on her apron. All right then, let's make a plan. They spent the next 2 hours going over details. Menu options, pricing, supply sources, labor division. Grace would handle the front of house, manage the books, deal with customers. Mara would do all the cooking, menu planning, and kitchen management. Profits would be split 60-40 in Grace's favor since she was providing the space and taking the bigger financial risk. When do we open? Grace asked. 3 weeks. Gives us time to prepare the space, get supplies ordered, spread word, and to practice. Practice what? You've never run a restaurant. I've never cooked for paying customers who can walk out if they don't like the food. We need to make sure we know what we're doing before we open those doors. Grace nodded slowly. That's smart. All right, 3 weeks. She left with the ledger clutched to her chest like armor. Mara watched her walk away through snow that was finally starting to melt at the edges, revealing brown grass underneath that looked dead, but probably wasn't. That evening, Mara told Walter about the partnership. His reaction wasn't what she expected. He looked worried. You're going to work 2 jobs? He asked. Here and in town? The restaurant won't be open for breakfast or late dinner. I can manage both. That's not what concerns me. He poured himself coffee, took a long drink. You open a restaurant in town, you're putting yourself in front of people every single day.
No buffer, no distance. Just you and everyone who's decided you're the problem. I can handle it. Can you? Because this isn't like the cooking competition where you show up, prove yourself, and leave. This is ongoing, daily. They'll be watching for any excuse to tear you down. Then I won't give them an excuse. Walter shook his head. You're not hearing me. They don't need a real excuse. They'll manufacture one. Food too salty. You're incompetent. Too bland. You're cheap. Perfect. You're getting above yourself. There's no winning move here. They're staying alive and making money. That's winning enough. He was quiet for a moment, studying her. You know what's going to happen when this restaurant succeeds, don't you? If it succeeds. When? Because you're too stubborn to let it fail. He leaned forward. When it succeeds, they're not going to give you credit. They'll say Grace made it work despite you. They'll say the food would be better with a different cook. They'll find ways to diminish what you've built because admitting you succeeded means admitting they were wrong about you. I don't need their admission. I need their money. Walter almost smiled at that. Fair enough. Just be careful. Success makes you a bigger threat, not a smaller one. The next 3 weeks were the hardest Mara had worked since arriving in Coldwater Junction. Days started at 4 in the morning, cooking for the ranch hands, then into town to help Grace transform the boarding house dining room into something that looked like a real restaurant. Afternoons back at the ranch, preparing dinner. Evenings, testing recipes, training Grace on basic service procedures, planning menus that would work with limited supplies and Wyoming winter vegetables. She slept maybe 4 hours a night. Lost weight she didn't have to lose. Developed a cough that wouldn't quit from going between the overheated kitchen and the freezing outdoors too many times. But the restaurant came together. Grace painted the dining room a warm cream color that made the space feel bigger. Mara convinced Walter to build proper shelving for the kitchen. Elsie, when she wasn't in school, helped sew new curtains and tablecloths from fabric Grace had been saving for years. They decided to call it Morrison's Kitchen. Simple, honest, nothing fancy or pretentious. The menu was equally straightforward. Roast chicken, beef stew, pork chops, fresh bread, seasonal vegetables, apple pie, coffee. Food that was good because it was made properly, not because it was complicated. 2 days before opening, Jacob Mercer stopped by while Mara was in the kitchen testing a new gravy recipe. Grace showed him in, her face tight with anxiety. Mr. Mercer, Mara said, not stopping her work. What can I do for you? I heard you're opening a restaurant. News travels fast. It's a small town. He watched her work for a moment. I also heard there's been talk. Threats of boycotts. Suggestions that decent people shouldn't patronize an establishment run by women of questionable character. Sounds about right. I want you to know I've been speaking against that talk, reminding people that character is demonstrated through actions, not marital status. That you saved 2 men's lives during that storm. That your cooking won the festival competition fairly. Mara finally looked at him. Why? Why what? Why defend me? I refused your proposal, embarrassed you publicly. I'm everything this town thinks is wrong with modern women. Why speak up? Jacob pulled out a chair and sat uninvited. Because I've been thinking about that conversation we had, about ownership and safety and the difference between protection and control. You were right. I was offering to own you, not partner with you, and that was wrong. Most men would double down rather than admit that. Most men are fools, bum. He paused. I'm trying not to be. Apology accepted, but that doesn't explain why you're here. I'm here to tell you that when you open, I'll be your first customer, publicly, where everyone can see. It won't stop the boycotts entirely, but it might give others permission to follow. Mara studied him carefully, looking for the angle. Men didn't just change their minds and start supporting women who'd rejected them. There had to be something else. What do you want in return? She asked. Nothing. Except maybe... He hesitated. Except to prove to myself that I can be better than my first instincts. It was possibly the most honest thing any man in Coldwater Junction had said to her. All right, Mara said. Opening day, noon. We'll save you a table. He left looking oddly relieved. Grace came into the kitchen as soon as he was gone. Do you believe him? Grace asked. I believe he wants to believe himself. Whether that's the same as being trustworthy. Mara shrugged. We'll find out. Opening day came with clear skies and temperatures just warm enough that the snow was turning to slush in the streets. Mara arrived at Morrison's kitchen at dawn to start prep work. Grace was already there, wearing a new dress she'd stayed up half the night finishing, her hair pinned so tight it looked painful. "I'm terrified," Grace admitted. "Good. Means you're paying attention." Mara tied on her apron. "Now stop being terrified and start being useful. Those potatoes won't peel themselves." They worked in synchronized silence, the kind that came from 3 weeks of intense preparation. By 11, the kitchen smelled like roasting chicken and fresh bread. The dining room was spotless, tables set, windows clean. A small sign in the window announced, "Morrison's Kitchen, grand opening, all welcome." Noon came. Nobody arrived. 12:15, still nothing. 12:30. The door stayed closed. Grace stood behind the counter, gripping her new ledger so hard her knuckles went white. Elsie, who'd been given permission to miss school for the opening, sat at a table trying not to cry. Mara stayed in the kitchen, making adjustments to dishes that were already perfect, trying not to think about the fact that they'd been right. The boycott was working. Nobody was coming. At 12:45, the door opened. Jacob Mercer walked in, alone, and took a seat at the table by the window where everyone passing by could see him. "Good afternoon, Miss Morrison," he said formally. "I'd like to order the roast chicken, please." Grace's voice shook. "Of course, Mr. Mercer. Coffee?" "Please." Mara plated the chicken with vegetables and gravy, her hand steady despite the pounding in her chest. This was it. One customer, one man willing to cross the invisible line the town had drawn. She carried the plate out herself and set it in front of Jacob. "Thank you, Miss Bell," he said, loud enough for anyone outside to hear, then quieter. "It smells delicious. Let me know if it tastes as good as it smells." She went back to the kitchen, waited, listened to the sound of one man eating in an empty restaurant. 5 minutes later, the door opened again. An older couple Mara didn't recognize, then a family with 3 children, then 2 men who looked like ranch hands from one of the neighboring spreads. By 1 o'clock, half the tables were full. By 1:30, they were turning people away. The boycott hadn't held, or at least not completely. Enough people had been curious or hungry or willing to give good food a chance despite the scandal that Morrison's Kitchen survived its first day. Mara cooked until her arms ached, plating dish after dish, while Grace moved through the dining room taking orders and delivering food with efficiency born of pure determination. Elsie helped clear tables, refill coffee, and look happier than Mara had ever seen her. When they finally closed at 3, exhausted and triumphant, Grace counted the receipts and started laughing. "We made $40, she said, disbelief in her voice. $40 on the first day. After expenses?" Mara asked. "After expenses. That's pure profit." It wasn't a fortune, but it was more than either of them had expected. More importantly, it was proof that this could work. The success didn't go unnoticed. That evening, when Mara returned to the ranch to cook dinner, Garrett was waiting for her. "Heard your little restaurant did good business today," he said. "It did. Must be nice. Making money in town while still collecting wages here. Double dipping." Mara pushed past him into the cookhouse. "I'm doing the work I was hired to do. What I do on my own time is my business." "Is it, though? Because seems to me you're spreading yourself thin. Working 2 jobs means you can't do either one properly." "The hands eating my food have any complaints?" "Not yet, but winter's not over. Lot can go wrong when someone's distracted." It was a threat, subtle but clear. Garrett was going to be watching for any excuse to claim she wasn't fulfilling her obligations to the ranch. "Noted," Mara said coldly. "Now get out of my kitchen." He left grinning. Carl found her 20 minutes later, slamming dough with more force than necessary. "Garrett giving you trouble?" he asked. "Nothing I can't handle." "He's been talking to some of the other hands, suggesting you're going to abandon the ranch now that you've got the restaurant going, that we should start looking for a replacement cook." "Are you?" "Hell no. Best food we've had in a decade, and you think I'm letting you go because Garrett's got his feelings hurt?" Carl pulled up a chair. "But you should know, he's not working alone. There's talk in town, too. Women saying you're stealing business from the hotel, that you're going to put people out of work. The hotel's food is terrible. Doesn't matter.
You're succeeding, and that makes you dangerous. People don't like dangerous.
Mara shaped the dough into rolls with practiced efficiency. So what do you suggest? Fail on purpose to make everyone comfortable? I suggest you watch your back. Success has a way of making enemies multiply. He was right, and Mara knew it, but she was too far in to stop now. Morrison's kitchen stayed busy through the following weeks. Not packed every day, but steady. Enough that Grace could pay her bills and keep Elsie in school. Enough that Mara's share of the profits gave her actual savings for the first time since arriving in Wyoming. But the success came with complications. Mrs. Brennan started a rumor that the food quality was inconsistent, that she'd gotten sick after eating there, though she'd never actually set foot in the restaurant. The hotel dining room cut their prices in half, trying to undercut Morrison's kitchen. It didn't work. Their food was still terrible, but it signaled how threatened they felt. And then there was the incident with the sugar. Mara arrived one morning to find their entire supply of sugar ruined. Someone had poured kerosene into the bins, making it unusable. The lock on the back door showed marks like someone had picked it. Grace stood in the kitchen staring at the ruined sugar, tears running down her face. We can't afford to replace all this, she said. Not right now. We're still recovering from startup costs. How much do we need for today's pies? Mara asked. 6 pounds minimum. I've got some at the ranch. I'll get it. Mara, that's your supply for the work you're contracted to do. I can get more. Right now you need sugar, and I have it. That's all that matters. She rode back to the Bar W, loaded sugar into saddlebags, and was back within 2 hours. The pies got made. The restaurant opened on time. Nobody but Grace and Elsie ever knew how close they'd come to having to close for the day. That night, Mara stayed late in the restaurant kitchen, checking locks, looking for other signs of tampering. She found none, but the message was clear. Someone wanted Morrison's kitchen to fail. The question was how far they were willing to go to make that happen. The answer came during the spring thaw. March arrived with temperatures warm enough that the snow started melting in earnest. The streets of Coldwater Junction turned to mud so deep horses sank to their hocks. Everything smelled like wet earth and possibility. Morrison's kitchen had been open 6 weeks. They'd settled into a rhythm, busy lunch service, steady afternoon business, consistent profits. Grace had hired a local girl to help with serving. Elsie had stopped looking over her shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Mara had started to think maybe they'd actually survived the worst of it. Then the health inspector showed up. He was a thin man with a clipboard and the expression of someone who took profound pleasure in finding violations. Grace met him at the door while Mara watched from the kitchen. Health inspection, he announced. Random check. I'll need to examine your kitchen, storage areas, and food handling procedures. Of course, Grace said, voice steady despite her fear. Right this way. He spent 2 hours going through everything, checking temperatures, examining storage containers, running his finger along surfaces looking for dust, making notes on his clipboard that looked extensive and damning. Mara stood quietly, answering his questions with facts, refusing to be defensive. Finally, he finished and faced them both. I'm finding multiple violations, he said. Improper food storage, inadequate cooling procedures, failure to maintain proper sanitation standards. That's not true, Mara said calmly. Everything is stored according to standard procedures. Temperature logs are maintained daily. Sanitation exceeds minimum requirements. According to my assessment, they don't. He tapped his clipboard. I'm issuing a citation. You have 1 week to correct these violations and request a reinspection. If violations persist, I'll be forced to shut you down. Let me see that list, Mara said. He handed it over. She read through it carefully, feeling anger rise with each line. The violations were fabricated. Food stored at 40 degrees when regulation required 45 or below. They kept everything at 38. Inadequate hand-washing facilities. They had 2 sinks dedicated solely to hand-washing. Improper waste disposal. Their system was better than the hotel's. These findings are false, Mara said, keeping her voice level. And I can prove it. You can dispute them in writing, the inspector said, but the citation stands. Who sent you? Grace asked suddenly. This is a random inspection. We've been open 6 weeks. You show up now after we've been consistently busy and find violations that don't exist? Grace's composure cracked. Who sent you? I don't appreciate your tone, Miss Morrison, and I certainly don't appreciate the implication that I'm not doing my job properly. Your job is to ensure food safety. Our kitchen is safer than half the establishments in this town. So either you're incompetent or you're corrupt. Which is it? His face went red. You just earned yourself a more thorough inspection. I'll be back in 1 week, and I suggest you use that time to correct your attitude as well as your violations. He left. Grace collapsed into a chair. Elsie, who'd been watching from the dining room, came over and put her arms around her mother. Mara stared at the citation, fury and frustration warring in her chest. "They're not going to let us succeed," Grace said quietly. "We were fools to think we could." "No," Mara's voice was sharp. "They're going to try to shut us down. That's different than succeeding." "How? We can't fight a health citation. If he comes back and claims the violations still exist, he can close us immediately. Then we make sure there's nothing he can claim. We document everything. Temperature logs every hour, photos of storage areas, written procedures for every single task. We make this kitchen so bulletproof that even a corrupt inspector can't find legitimate violations. And if he just makes them up again, then we go over his head. County officials, territorial government if we have to. We don't quit because someone's playing dirty." Grace looked at her with something like awe. "You really believe we can win this?" "I believe we can fight. Whether we win," Mara shrugged. "That's not up to us. But we don't fold just because they want us to." The next week was documentation hell. Mara created written procedures for everything from how to store flour to how long cooked food could sit before being served. Grace photographed the kitchen from every angle. Elsie took temperature readings every hour and recorded them in a dedicated logbook. They turned Morrison's kitchen into the most meticulously documented restaurant in Wyoming. The inspector returned exactly 1 week later, looking disappointed to find them still open. This time, Mara had Jacob Mercer present as a witness. "You requested I attend?" Jacob asked before the inspection started. "I want a respected member of the community present to observe this inspection," Mara said, "to ensure it's conducted fairly." The inspector's face tightened, but he couldn't refuse without making his bias obvious. He went through the kitchen again, checked everything twice, looked for violations he'd cited the previous week, found none, because Mara had made sure there was nothing to find. "Well?" Grace asked when he'd finished. "Everything appears to be in order," he said, the words clearly causing him physical pain. "So the citation is lifted?" "Yes, conditional on maintaining these standards." "We will," Mara said. "We'll maintain them every single day, and we'll be happy to have you return any time for unannounced inspections, just to ensure we're staying compliant." It was a dare. "Come back any time, and we'll be ready." He left without another word. Jacob stayed behind, shaking his head slowly. "That was boldly done," he said. "That was survival," Mara corrected. "Nothing bold about it." "Still, not many people would stand up to that kind of pressure. Not many people have a choice." He studied her for a moment. "You know what I've learned watching you these past months? I've learned that strength isn't the absence of fear. It's the refusal to let fear make your decisions." Pretty words, but they don't put food on the table. "No, but they do change how people see you. A few months ago, this town wanted you gone. Now," he gestured around the restaurant, "now they're not so sure. Some still hate you, but others are starting to respect you. That's progress. Progress toward what? Toward belonging. Toward being seen as part of this community instead of a threat to it." Mara wanted to believe him, wanted to think that fighting hard enough, long enough, would eventually earn her a place here, but she'd seen too much to trust that hope completely. That evening, back at the ranch, Walter met her with news. "Spring roundup starts next week," he said. "I'll need you cooking for extra hands. We're bringing in help from neighboring ranches. That's going to be 14 men, 3 meals a day, for about 10 days. I can manage it." "Can you? With the restaurant running?" "The restaurant's lunch and afternoon only. I'll do early breakfast here, prep for lunch to leave with Grace, back for ranch dinner, then evening prep for the next day's restaurant service." Walter looked skeptical. "That's barely 4 hours of sleep a night." "Then I'll sleep when roundup's over." "Mara, I said I can manage it." He backed off, but his expression said he thought she was making a mistake. Maybe she was. But she didn't have the luxury of choosing easy paths. She had 2 jobs because one job wasn't enough to build the life she wanted. Because independence cost money, and money required work, and work required more hours than seemed humanly possible. So she'd make it possible, or die trying. The roundup started on a Monday morning that smelled like mud and new grass. 14 men descended on the cookhouse expecting massive quantities of food. Mara delivered, running on coffee and stubbornness, cooking breakfast for an army and then riding into town to prepare lunch service. Grace took one look at her and said, "You look terrible." "I'm fine." "You're exhausted. When did you last sleep?" "I'll sleep later." Mara, don't. Mara started chopping vegetables with sharp, angry movements. "Don't tell me to slow down. Don't suggest I quit one job or the other. I know what I'm doing, and I know what it costs. Just let me do it." Grace backed off, but her worried expression didn't change. The days blurred together. Cooking, serving, cleaning, prepping, riding back and forth between ranch and town until she forgot which kitchen she was supposed to be in. Her cough got worse. Her hands developed burns and cuts she didn't remember getting. She lost more weight and started having trouble focusing. But she kept going. On the 8th day of roundup, she collapsed. Not dramatically. She was plating dinner at the ranch when her vision went gray at the edges and her knees just stopped working. She caught herself on the counter, but the pot she'd been holding crashed to the floor, spilling stew everywhere. Carl found her sitting in the mess, staring at ruined food, too exhausted to even cry. "That's it," he said. "You're done for tonight. Dinner's not—" "I'll handle dinner. You're going to your room and you're sleeping for 12 hours. "I can't. I have to prep for tomorrow's restaurant service. You have to stop before you kill yourself." He pulled her to her feet. "I've seen this before. People who work themselves past exhaustion. They make mistakes, get hurt, sometimes die from things that wouldn't have been dangerous if they'd just rested. You're at that point." "I'm fine." "You just collapsed. That's not fine." Mara wanted to argue, but she was so tired. Tired of fighting, tired of proving herself, tired of being strong when all she wanted was to be small and safe and not responsible for anything. "What am I supposed to do?" she asked, hearing her voice break. "If I quit the restaurant, I lose independence. If I quit here, I lose steady income. I need both. You need help," Carl said. "You need to stop trying to do everything alone." "I don't have anyone to ask." "Then ask anyway, because right now you're heading toward a breakdown, and that helps nobody." He walked her to her room, made her lie down, brought her water and bread, and stood there until she'd eaten some of it. "Sleep," he ordered. "I'll handle tonight." She wanted to protest, but exhaustion pulled her under before she could form words. When she woke, it was morning. Light was streaming through her window. She'd slept for 14 hours straight, and the world hadn't ended. Breakfast had been managed. Carl had organized the hands to cook a simple but adequate meal. The restaurant had closed for the day. Grace had put a sign in the window explaining there was a family emergency. Mara got up feeling shaky but human again. She made coffee, sat at the small table in her room, and realized something fundamental. She couldn't do this alone. She'd been trying to prove she didn't need anyone, that she could survive through sheer determination and refusal to quit. But survival wasn't the same as living, and what she'd been doing these past weeks wasn't sustainable. Something had to change. The question was what? The answer came from an unexpected source. Mara was back in the restaurant kitchen the next afternoon, moving slower but steadier, when Elsie arrived with a girl Mara didn't recognize. The newcomer was maybe 16, plain-faced and nervous, twisting her hands in her apron. "Miss Bell," Elsie said, "this is Annie Wright. She wants to learn how to cook." Mara looked up from the bread dough she was kneading. "I'm not taking students." "I know, ma'am, but I heard—" Annie's voice was soft, almost apologetic. "I heard you might need help, and I need work. My pa died last month, and my ma's got 4 younger ones to feed. I can't pay for lessons, but I can work for food and whatever you think is fair. I can't afford to pay anyone. I'm not asking for much, just pennies maybe, and the chance to learn something that might get me real work someday." Mara studied the girl. She saw hunger there, and desperation, and something else. Hope, maybe. The same kind that had driven Mara onto that stage months ago. "You ever cooked before?" Mara asked. "At home. Nothing fancy, but I can follow directions and I'm not afraid of hard work." Grace appeared in the doorway.
We could use the help, she said quietly. You're killing yourself trying to do everything. And if Annie's willing to learn, I am, Annie said quickly. I'll do whatever needs doing. Dishes, chopping, cleaning. Just, please.
Mara looked at this girl who was trying to save her family the same way Mara had tried to save hers. Saw herself at 16, already working at the cannery, already understanding that survival meant sacrifice. All right, she said. Trial period. 2 weeks. You show up on time, work hard, don't complain, and we'll see about making it permanent. I'll pay you $2 a week plus meals. Annie's face lit up like Mara had offered her the moon. Thank you. You won't regret this, I promise. Don't promise. Just show up and work. Annie showed up, and she worked like someone who understood that this chance might be her only one. She chopped vegetables until her hands blistered, scrubbed pots until they gleamed, watched everything Mara did with the intensity of someone memorizing salvation. By the end of the first week, she could make passable biscuits. By the end of the second, she was handling basic prep work without supervision. She's good, Grace said one evening after closing. Natural talent, or maybe just desperate enough to learn fast. Both, probably. Mara watched Annie through the window as the girl walked home through streets that were finally drying out. I'm keeping her on. Can we afford it? Can we afford not to? I was running myself into the ground. This way I can focus on the cooking that matters and delegate the rest. It was a revelation, learning to delegate. Learning that accepting help wasn't the same as admitting weakness. Mara had spent so long proving she could do everything alone that she'd forgotten there might be another way. With Annie handling prep work, Mara found she could breathe again, could sleep more than 4 hours a night, could cook with the focus and precision that made her food exceptional instead of just adequate. And Morrison's Kitchen's reputation grew because of it. Word spread beyond Coldwater Junction. People from neighboring towns started making the trip for Sunday lunch. The hotel dining room, unable to compete with food that didn't taste like punishment, quietly raised their prices back up and stopped trying to undercut Morrison's. Even Mrs. Brennan, who'd led the campaign against Mara from the beginning, was spotted eating there one Tuesday afternoon. She didn't speak to Mara, didn't acknowledge her existence, but she paid her bill and left a decent tip. It wasn't acceptance, but it was something. Spring turned into early summer. The ranch work eased as cattle moved to higher pastures. Mara's contract with Walter was coming up on its 6-month mark, and he made it clear he wanted to renew. Best cook I've ever had, he said over coffee one morning. Hands are happy, food's good. You've more than earned another 6 months if you want it. Same terms? Same terms. $40 a month, room and board, supplies provided. It was fair. More than fair. But Mara found herself hesitating. What if I wanted to renegotiate? She asked. Walter raised an eyebrow. To what? $30 a month, but I only work breakfast and dinner. Lunch I handle myself, pack something, or skip it. Gives me more time for the restaurant. You'd take a pay cut for more free time? The restaurant's making money now, real money. Between that and the ranch wages, I'm actually building savings. But I'm still stretched thin. This way I can do both jobs properly instead of adequately. Walter considered it. What about when we have roundup or other busy times? Full service during those periods. Regular terms. But normal months, I need that midday gap. All right, deal. He held out his hand. But the hands are going to complain about losing lunch. The hands can make sandwiches. They shook on it. Mara's first real negotiation, conducted from a position of actual value instead of desperate necessity. It felt like progress. But progress, she was learning, made some people angry. Garrett cornered her one evening as she was closing up the ranch kitchen. Heard you renegotiated your contract, he said. That's between me and Walter. Is it? Because seems to me it affects all of us. You work less, we work more. How's that fair? You're welcome to negotiate your own contract if you think you can do better. I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about you taking advantage, coming in here, causing problems, and then getting special treatment because you've got the boss wrapped around your finger. Mara set down the dish towel she'd been holding. Say what you actually mean, Garrett. Stop dancing around it. Fine. You want me to be direct? You're a woman using your position to manipulate men. First, the restaurant partnership. Bet Grace didn't have a choice, did she? You probably threatened her somehow. Then renegotiating with Walt, making him think he needs you when really you're just making yourself indispensable through what? Good cooking, hard work, saving two men's lives? Through being a woman in a place where women don't belong. You know what I think? I think you like the attention, like being the one everyone talks about, the scandal, the outcast who proved everyone wrong. It's all about your pride. My pride. Mara laughed, a sound with sharp edges. You think I came here for pride? I came here because I was broke and desperate, because my father died in a factory fire, and I had nothing left back east except more poverty and more factories. I took this job because I needed money. I opened the restaurant because I needed more money. Everything I've done has been about survival, not pride. Then why not just marry Jacob when he asked? Would have solved all your problems. No, it would have traded my problems for different ones I couldn't control. Garrett shook his head. You're wrong. You could have had security, respect, a real place here. Instead, you chose to be difficult. And now you're paying for it. Am I? Because from where I'm standing, I've got two income sources, savings and a life I built myself. What exactly am I paying for? Loneliness. You got money, sure. But you got any friends? Anyone who'd help you if things went bad? Or are you just going to die alone in this godforsaken territory, having proved nothing except that you're too stubborn to accept reality? He left before she could respond, but his words stuck with her like burrs. Was he right? She had work, money, independence, but did she have anything else? Grace was a business partner, not really a friend. The ranch hands respected her cooking but kept their distance. Even Jacob's support felt transactional, like he was proving something to himself rather than genuinely caring about her. She'd won battles but maybe lost the war. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Mara thought about Philadelphia, about her father's funeral, attended by exactly 3 people: herself, his foreman, who felt obligated, and a neighbor who'd probably just been nosy. He died alone in a charity hospital, having worked 40 years for wages that barely kept him alive. She'd promised herself she'd do better, build something more, leave some kind of mark. But maybe Garrett was right. Maybe all she'd done was trade one kind of poverty for another. Financial stability in exchange for human connection. The thought kept her awake until dawn. She was still thinking about it the next afternoon at Morrison's kitchen when Jacob Mercer came in for his regular Tuesday lunch. "You look troubled," he said after ordering. "Just tired. You're always tired. This is different." Mara brought his coffee and sat down across from him, something she never did with customers. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When I refused your proposal, did I make a mistake?" Jacob's eyebrows rose. "That's quite a question. I'm serious. You offered security, respectability, a place in this community. I chose independence instead, and I got it. I'm making money, building a business, proving I can survive on my own. But..." She stopped, trying to find words for the hollow feeling that had been growing lately. "But I'm not sure survival is the same as living. What's the difference? Survival is endurance. Survival is getting through each day. Living is, I don't know, connection? Purpose beyond just not dying?" Jacob was quiet for a moment, studying her with those careful eyes. "You want my honest answer?" "Please." "No. You didn't make a mistake. You made the only choice you could make and still be yourself." He leaned forward. "Mara, I'll be frank. When I proposed, I was offering you safety in exchange for surrender. You would have been comfortable, yes. Respected, probably. But you would have been mine. My wife, my responsibility, my possession. And every day, you would have had to swallow a little more of yourself to fit the shape I needed. Maybe I could have lived with that. Could you? Really? Look at what you've built in 6 months. A thriving restaurant, a reputation for excellence. You saved lives during that storm. You've trained Annie, given her a future. You've changed how this town thinks about women and work, even if they won't admit it. Would you trade all that for comfort?" "I'd trade it for not being alone." "You're not alone, aren't I? I have business associates, people who need me, but I don't have..." She gestured vaguely. "Whatever it is that makes a life more than just work and sleep. Then build that too." "How?" "The same way you built everything else. Deliberately. With effort." Jacob sat back. "You want my opinion? You've spent 6 months proving you can survive without depending on anyone. That was necessary. You had to establish that you're capable, independent, worthy of respect on your own terms. But now that you've proven it, maybe it's time to let people in. Not because you need them, but because you choose them. I don't know how to do that. Start small. Accept an invitation to someone's house for dinner. Ask Grace about her life beyond the restaurant. Let the ranch hands see you as a person, not just a cook. You've built walls for protection. They worked. But walls that keep danger out also keep connection out. He left her with that thought and his empty plate. That evening, Mara did something she'd never done before. She knocked on Grace's private quarters above the restaurant. Grace answered, surprised. Is something wrong? No, Mara felt suddenly foolish. I realized I don't actually know much about you. Beyond the business, I mean, and I thought maybe we could talk. If you're not busy. Grace's expression softened. Come in. The rooms were small but comfortable, furnished with care and the kind of touches that meant home rather than just shelter. Elsie was at the table doing homework. She looked up and grinned. Miss Bell, did you come to teach me to cook? I came to talk to your mother, but I could look at your homework if you want. They spent 2 hours there, talking about things that had nothing to do with food or business. Grace told stories about coming west 15 years ago, about the husband she'd briefly had who died in a mining accident, about building the boarding house from almost nothing. Elsie talked about her dreams of becoming a teacher, of maybe going to a real college someday. And Mara talked too, about Philadelphia, about her father, about the moment she'd realized she had to leave or die trying to stay. It wasn't earth-shattering conversation, just people being human with each other. But it mattered. Over the following weeks, Mara made similar small efforts. Stayed after dinner at the ranch occasionally to play cards with the hands who were willing. Accepted an invitation to a community barn dance, even though she couldn't dance and felt awkward the entire time. Started actually talking to customers at Morrison's Kitchen instead of just taking orders. The walls came down slowly, carefully, piece by piece. And something unexpected happened. The town started changing too, not dramatically. Not everyone. Mrs. Brennan still barely acknowledged Mara's existence. Some families still wouldn't eat at Morrison's Kitchen on principle, but others softened, started treating her like a person who belonged instead of an intruder to be tolerated. Garrett even stopped his hostile comments, though he never became friendly. The shift was subtle but real. Mara could feel it in the way people greeted her on the street, in the invitations that started arriving for community events, in the fact that when someone's barn burned down in late June, Morrison's Kitchen was asked to provide meals for the rebuilding crew. She was becoming part of the community she'd fought so hard to survive in. In August, Grace called a business meeting. They sat in the restaurant after closing, and Grace spread financial records across the table. We need to talk about expansion, Grace said. Expansion? We're turning away customers most days. We've got people traveling from 3 towns over to eat here. The space is too small. Grace pointed to the records. We've made enough profit to consider buying the building next door. It's been empty for months. If we knocked through the wall, we could double our seating. Mara looked at the numbers. Grace was right. They were making far more than either of them had projected. Morrison's Kitchen had gone from desperate gamble to legitimate success. That's a huge investment, Mara said. It's a huge opportunity, but I can't do it alone. I'd need you to commit long term, not just as a cook, but as a real partner, equal ownership, equal decision-making, equal risk. What about the ranch? What about it? Walter's renewing your contract again, isn't he? Yes, but you're thinking about what comes next. I can see it in your face. You've been here almost a year. You've proven everything you needed to prove. The question is what you want to build now. Mara sat back, feeling the weight of the decision. The ranch was steady income, comfortable routine. The restaurant was growth, risk, potential. If we expand, she said slowly, I'd need to hire someone to take over ranch cooking, train them properly so Walter's not left stranded. So you're saying yes? I'm saying I'll think about it. She talked to Walter the next day. His reaction surprised her. I was wondering when you'd move on, he said. I'm not moving on, I'm just building something bigger. I know, and you should. He poured them both coffee. Mara, when you showed up here last December, half frozen and desperate, I thought maybe you'd last a month. The town was against you, winter was coming, and you were one woman trying to do a job most men would find difficult. But you didn't just survive. You built 2 successful businesses,
changed minds, saved lives. You've outgrown this ranch. The ranch gave me my start. And you gave us the best food we've had in years. We're even. He grinned. Besides, Annie Wright's been asking if there's any ranch work available. She's learned enough from you that I bet she could handle cooking here. Wouldn't be as good as you, but good enough. You'd hire her? If you recommend her, which I'm guessing you do. Mara thought about Annie, her determination, her growing skill, her desperate need for steady work. I do. Then it's settled. You train her for a month, make sure she's ready. After that, you focus on the restaurant full time. It felt like an ending and a beginning at the same time. The month of training passed quickly. Annie absorbed everything Mara taught her with the same intensity she'd shown from the beginning. By September, she was cooking ranch meals that weren't just adequate, they were actually good. On Mara's last day of regular ranch cooking, the hands presented her with a gift. A set of cooking knives, better quality than anything she owned, with her initials engraved on the handles. From all of us, Carl said, for keeping us fed and alive. Even Garrett had chipped in, though he looked uncomfortable about the whole thing. Mara felt her throat tighten. Thank you. All of you. You earned it, Carl said simply. The restaurant expansion took 3 months, knocking through walls, building new kitchen space, adding tables and equipment. Grace and Mara worked alongside the construction crew, making decisions, solving problems, investing every penny of profit back into the business. Morrison's Kitchen reopened in December, exactly 1 year after Mara had arrived in Coldwater Junction, with seating for 50 people, a kitchen twice the original size, and a staff that now included Annie, the serving girl Grace had hired, and a dishwasher named Tom, who was simple-minded but reliable. The grand reopening was packed, people standing in line outside despite the cold. The mayor came and gave a speech about community progress and entrepreneurial spirit. Mrs. Brennan brought her whole family, and when Mara stood in that crowded dining room, watching people eat food she'd prepared, talking and laughing and treating this place like it belonged to the town instead of being a scandal to be shut down, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not just survival, not just independence, belonging. That night, after everyone had left and the kitchen was clean, Grace found Mara sitting alone at a table. You did it, Grace said. We did it. No, I provided space. You provided the vision, the skill, the absolute refusal to quit when anyone sensible would have given up. Grace sat down across from her. A year ago, you were the woman the whole town wanted gone. Now you're, what did the mayor call you? A vital contributor to Coldwater Junction's economic development. The mayor's an idiot. Maybe. But he's not wrong. Grace reached across the table and squeezed Mara's hand. Thank you for the partnership, for the risk, for showing Elsie that women can build something on their own terms. Where's Elsie? Upstairs studying. She got accepted to that teacher training program in Cheyenne. Starts next fall. That's wonderful. It's terrifying. But it's also everything I wanted for her, and she wouldn't have had the courage to apply if she hadn't seen you fight for what you wanted. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, exhausted and satisfied. What's next? Grace asked eventually. What do you mean? You've conquered the frontier, built a thriving business, earned respect in a town that wanted you destroyed. What do you do now? Mara considered the question. A year ago, she would have said, survive another day. 6 months ago, prove herself. Now? I think I just live, she said. Run this restaurant, make good food, help other people build their own futures the way you and Annie and Elsie are building theirs. Maybe that's enough. Is it? Ask me again in a year. Spring came early in 1893. By March, the snow was gone and the streets had dried to dust instead of mud. Morrison's Kitchen was doing steady business, enough that they were considering hiring another cook to handle the increasing demand. Annie had settled in well at the Bar W ranch and was engaged to one of the hands. She still came by the restaurant on her days off to learn new techniques and gossip about ranch life. Elsie was preparing for her move to Cheyenne with excitement and terror in equal measure. And Mara was standing in her kitchen one Tuesday afternoon when Jacob Mercer came in for his regular lunch. You look content, he said. I am. Good. You've earned it. He paused. I wanted to tell you, I'm getting married. Mara felt surprise but not jealousy. Congratulations. Who's the lucky woman? Sarah Collins.
Widow from Rollins. We've been corresponding for months. She's smart, independent, runs her own dressmaking business. We're equals. Not, he stopped, not owner and property. Exactly, he smiled. You taught me that. Taught a lot of men in this town that, actually, whether they admit it or not. I just wanted to cook. No, you wanted to be free, and you showed everyone watching that freedom was possible. That's more than just cooking. After he left, Mara thought about that, about the years she'd spent fighting for the right to exist on her own terms, about the women who'd watched and learned, about Annie and Elsie and even Grace, who'd all found courage in her refusal to surrender. She'd come west for honest work and a fresh start. She'd found both, but she'd also found something else, purpose beyond survival, community built through competence and stubborn determination, a life that belonged to her completely because she'd fought for every inch of it. The frontier hadn't been kind. It had been brutal, hostile, relentlessly difficult, but she'd matched its harshness with her own strength, had refused to be broken by weather, prejudice, economics, or the coordinated efforts of people who thought they knew better than she did what her life should look like. And she'd won. Not perfectly, not without scars, but definitively. That evening, Mara stood outside Morrison's kitchen as the sun set over Coldwater Junction. The town looked different than it had a year ago. Warmer somehow, less hostile, or maybe she was just seeing it differently now that it was hers. Not hers by right of birth or marriage or male permission, hers by conquest. The quiet kind that happened one meal at a time, one stand against injustice, one refusal to quit when quitting would have been easier. Grace came out to stand beside her, followed by Elsie. What are you thinking about? Elsie asked. How far we've come. How far you've come, Grace corrected. We just followed. No, we built it together, all of us. Every woman in this town who's watched and learned that they don't have to accept the limitations other people want to put on them. That's a pretty thought, Grace said. But the reality is messier. Most women here are still married, still dependent, still limited. For now, but the cracks are there, give it time. They stood watching the sun turn the sky orange and red. Three women who'd built something that mattered in a place that had tried to destroy them for daring to exist. Tomorrow, Mara would wake early and start prep work, would cook lunch for 50 people, would train her staff and manage supplies and make 1,000 small decisions that added up to a functioning business. But tonight, she just stood there feeling the warm wind on her face and understanding that she'd done it. Not just survived the frontier, but conquered it, built a life worth living on terms she'd set herself. The town of Coldwater Junction had wanted to break her, reshape her, force her into a mold that fit their comfort. Instead, she'd broken their certainty, reshaped their understanding of what was possible, and built something that would outlast all their objections. She'd come west with nothing but determination and a trunk full of possessions. She was leaving, not physically, but spiritually, that desperate, frightened version of herself behind. Walking into a future she'd earned through work that mattered, connections that sustained her, and the bone-deep knowledge that she belonged to herself and no one else. That was victory. Not the kind written in history books, not the kind celebrated with parades, the quiet kind, the lasting kind, the kind that changed everything by refusing to accept that change was impossible. And as she stood there with Grace and Elsie, watching the sun set on another day in the town that had tried to destroy her and failed, Maribel smiled. She'd made it. Not just to spring or summer or the end of her contract. She'd made it to the life she'd been fighting for all along, and she'd done it on her own terms. That was enough. That was everything.